Chapter 26, Part 2, we are going to look at two more tests for chi-squared. So in this section, we're going to discover two more tests. These tests are very similar, so the first thing that we're going to do is just focus on identifying and distinguishing the difference between the two types. So the first type that we have is called a chi-squared test of homogeneity. Okay, this is used when we have two or more populations and we're measuring one categorical variable. So for example, I could survey YHS and Oswego High School students asking what their favorite class is. My two populations would be YHS and OHS. The categorical variable that I'd be looking at is their favorite class. Okay, the question that we're asking ourselves with this test of homogeneity is whether the groups are the same. So the big thing that I look at for this type of test is that I need to make sure that I have two samples or two different groups. Okay, the other test that we have is called a chi-squared test of independence. Now with this test, we are going to have just one population, but in this case, it's going to measure two categorical variables. So for example, I could survey YHS students asking what their favorite class is and asking them their gender. So the one population would be your YHS students. The two variables that we're measuring are their favorite class and their gender. This time, since I only have one group, I only have one population, it doesn't make sense to ask myself if the groups are the same. So instead, we're going to ask ourselves, are the variables independent? Okay, independent means that the two variables have no impact on one another. So for example, your favorite class would have, or your gender would have no impact on your favorite class. It wouldn't matter whether you were male or female, that's not going to impact what classes you like. If things are not independent, then oftentimes we will say they are dependent. I often like to use the word associated. Okay, if two variables are associated or dependent, then one is impacting the other. So perhaps your gender does impact your favorite class. Maybe boys are more likely to like, history than girls. That would mean that gender, your favorite class, is dependent on your gender. So the first thing we're going to do is just look at a few examples, and we are going to get some practice identifying what type of test we're looking at. So example 1 says, is the distribution of gummy bear color the same for Haribo gummy bears and Meyer gummy bears? Data was collected and recorded below. So Haribo, I actually don't know how to say it. All of the gummy bear colors are listed here. Meyer gummy bears are listed in this column. So first question I would ask myself is, how many samples do I have? What are the populations that they come from? So in this case, we definitely have two different samples or two different groups. Okay, the two populations that they're coming from are the two brands of gummy bears. Okay, how many variables are we examining? So I'm looking at these two groups. What am I focusing on within those two groups? In this case, the only variable that I'm looking at, I'm only looking at one variable. That variable is the color of the gummy bears. Yes, I know that I have 5 colors listed, but these colors are only one variable. They're all just colors of the gummy bear. Okay, so since I'm looking at two groups and I'm only analyzing one variable, this would be a great example of a chi-squared test of independence. Independence because I have just one group and that is opposite. Sorry guys. Two groups, one variable. This is a great example of homogeneity. Okay, example 2 says 100 girls are selected at random and their eye and hair color are shown by the chart below. Can you conclude that eye color and hair color are independent? So here we have light hair, dark hair, brown eyes, and blue eyes. Okay, in this case, how many samples do we have and what population are they from? Now they told me that we selected 100 girls at random. That is just my one sample. And my guess is that the population here is just going to be girls. They're not very specific on what population I'm looking at, but I surveyed 100 girls, so I'm assuming I'm trying to make a conclusion about girls. Okay, how many variables are we examining? In this case, it looks like we're looking at two different variables. We're looking at hair color. I don't know why I put a parenthesis there. We're looking at hair color, and we're looking at eye color. So that's giving me two variables. Okay, one population, but testing two variables tells me that this should be a chi-squared test of independence. Okay, another quick way to tell if you're looking at independence or homogeneity is to look at the question. They're asking me, are these two variables independent? Oftentimes you'll see that word independent there, or you also might see the word associated. If they're asking for any sort of association or independence, you know right away that I should run a test of independence. Okay, there's one more on the next page here. Okay, why don't you guys take a minute to try example 3, same kind of thing, given the scenario, figure out how many samples, populations we're looking at, how many variables, and the type of test. Once you feel like you have an answer, go ahead and play the video and I'll go through my work. Okay, so for this example, I said that we have probably just one sample. My guess is that the population is just these battery production workers, whatever kind of, whoever's working at this battery control center. How many variables are we examining? We're looking at kind of two variables here. We're looking at the shift of those workers, whether they work morning, afternoon, or evening, and then we're looking at the effectiveness of the battery. What test should we run? I looked at this last question. Since we're looking for associated, I said we should run a chi-squared test of independence. Okay, my big kind of recommendation is to really focus on that last sentence or that question. If you see the word associated or independence, chances are you should probably run a chi-squared test of independence.